So welcome back to Talks from the Hub. I'm incredibly grateful today to Simon Smith, who's come along and is happy to share some thoughts with us. I'm head of strings here at the RCS. Simon is my counterpart at Wells Cathedral School, which is where I was a student many, many years ago. So Simon, welcome. Welcome to Glasgow. You've been giving a wonderful class for our students.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we were just talking earlier about how the music profession is recovering from the pandemic, and you had some really interesting thoughts.
Yes, I've been noticed in the last few months that orchestras have been advertising for extra players, which is something which is, I don't actually remember that happening in the previous 10 years. And I don't have proof of this, but anecdotally talking to people, what of course we found is that a lot of the older generation, people who didn't have secure jobs, have left the profession, which is of course a sad thing, and I hope that there aren't too many difficult stories there. But actually for the young people, there are suddenly a lot of opportunities. People are getting more work than perhaps they would have done at an earlier stage. So people my students at tertiary level are already working in a way that I wouldn't have expected to have happened 10 years ago. So
or even 5 years ago.
Or even 5 years ago, yes, precisely,
right.
Or actually precisely 3 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
And of course what has happened is that the music business has massively quickly recovered. And the existential fears that we all had about its long-term survival have proven so far to be unfounded. And actually it's there. How important music is and culture is to us as human beings is almost proven by that recovery so far to me. I mean, I hope it's not a temporary thing, and obviously there are difficult times ahead for all of society, but now, at this point in time, I'm feeling encouraged by what's been going on in the last 6 months or so since we've come back from the lockdowns. And
do you think the profession has gone back to business as usual, or do you think the profession has learnt something somehow, or some of us have?
Well, I mean, is it gone back to business as usual? Probably in some areas, yes. And that would inevitably have happened because the decision makers, the people who are running the business, of course, have gone back to what they know. But at the same time, this sort of real shake to the changes that were forced on us have made so many people think again about the ways in which this art can be disseminated. And I've said this. I say this to all the students all the time. It's not my job, or your job even, to predict the future of the industry, because we can't. We're too old. We have too much baggage. We have too many restrictions in the way things are done in our minds. However open-minded we as people and educators may be, what the younger generation will do with the industry and how they will want to disseminate this music, we can't predict that. What we have to do is give them the right skills and right flexibilities and the right way of thinking to be those cultural entrepreneurs, which was one of my favourite phrases. And I think that there is hope. There will always be hope for the business, so long as people are creative in how they're working with this material.
I mean, just looking back a generation or two, thinking about cultural entrepreneurs who set up, for instance, Chamber Orchestra of Europe, Mahler Chamber Orchestra, those groups that have become employers.
Yes.
They've become part of the mainstream, but in a way they haven't necessarily thought outside the box in terms of that format of a chamber orchestra playing a certain repertoire. I wonder if there's a bit more thinking outside the box that needs to happen for this generation. Yes,
I think so. The two examples you've given were following a pattern that goes back through, Sir Neville Marrone and the Academy of St Martin's, the Goldsborough Orchestra, which became English Chamber Orchestra, the Boyd Neal Orchestra. Before that, they were all following a pattern of a type of organisation. And actually, sort of relevant to that, really, I think it's always worth bearing in mind how brief that period post-war was, in which every city in Germany or America or the UK actually was setting up radio orchestras and this enormous flourishing of culture in that way. It's a very, very brief period of time.
Yeah.
Go back to the 19th century, how many orchestras were set up with that sort of degree of continuity of employment and so on? Very few.
Yeah.
But going forward, yes, absolutely, thinking outside the box and being brave and trying things and giving yourself permission to fail, and almost everybody will by definition fail. But if you don't try, you won't learn. Is that it's the same thing we experience in the practice room, isn't it? If you don't try that shift, you're never going to be able to get there.
Yeah.
And I think culturally, that's what they need to be thinking. They need to be ambitious to invent something that's not been invented before. We shouldn't. Actually, this is really incumbent on people like us in our position. We should never be negative about ideas that we think don't work or won't work.
Because we don't know.
We don't know. And we may very well say, do you know what, I remember 13 years ago when so-and-so did that, it just didn't work. Why didn't it work? We don't know why it didn't work. Maybe it worked because the personality is different, or the time is different, or the industry of the world is different. So yeah, we just have to keep encouraging creative out-of-the-box thinking.
Curiosity, and I love the way you're connecting that curiosity with the curiosity of technical development, musical development in the practice room. It's almost the same thing, the same stance.
Absolutely. So we had a little bit of a conversation in the class this morning. Somebody played a piece that I'd never heard before. Well, I had heard it before because obviously I knew it was going to be played, so I listened to it, and I got the music and I played it through. But it was completely new work to me. And the conversation that we had was, what is it about playing something like this that excites you? And obviously the answers came back, well, that because it's not been done before, or not done very often, there isn't baggage that I am more free to play as I wish. And actually, at one point you played completely the wrong note and nobody would have known because it harmonically made sense and it didn't matter. Expressively, it had the same effect. But then we sort of try to draw from that. What can you learn from that about your approach to the rest of repertoire? Yeah. Can you find a way to play a Beethoven sonata like you're the first person to ever play it? Because when you do that, when you can play with that degree of conviction, you're going to be communicating at another level. And so that one of the current trends, which again people of our generation can be quite snooty about, why are we playing all of this second-rate music by women composers or by composers from here, there and everywhere? There's a reason it's not as well known, it's not as great as Bach. Yeah. That's not the point.
No.
The point is that within that, yes, there may be something which is not that great, but there may also be something which is great, and it's incumbent on us to find it. But the process of learning that music, the process of discovering it and making value judgments about it, that's what we're here to do. It's that curiosity has to be there. And curiosity about the repertoire that is in the standard canon. You have to be curious about that as well. So it absolutely is a hugely important learning experience, and that it's completely changed. I mean, the repertoire I'm hearing today, I would not have expected to hear 10 years ago, some of it 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's all changed, and thank goodness.
Yeah.
Because we're all benefiting from that attitude.
Yes. And it's interesting because a big part of my career as a musician has been historically informed performance, and I discovered that at Wells from your predecessor, Mark Knight. And he sort of sparked my interest in this different relationship with the text, if you like.
Yes.
Rather than necessarily with an instrument. It's about how you relate to the text.
Yeah.
What fascinates me about it is how, for instance, here in Glasgow, we don't have an early music department. And I like that because it means, rather than saying, well, over there, the people who like that sort of thing are over there doing that kind of thing. It's a little bit like the approach that says, well, your women conductors can go and conduct music by women. Your black students can go and play music by BA&E composers. Yeah. The point is, we want all of these things to be integrated in a meaningful way for all of us.
Absolutely. The ghettoization of certain types of music is counterproductive. Yeah. And I would, no early music department. Why? Why do you need one? Yeah. Shouldn't we all just be playing some of it? Yeah. Or experiencing it? And where does it start and stop? Yeah. Where does contemporary music start and stop?
Yeah. And I'm sure you've read Leopold Auer. How I play the violin, how I teach the violin. That little book.
That little one, yes.
I would love to hear somebody have a go at Tchaikovsky Concerto, which is dedicated to him. Yeah. In a way that might line up with what he's talking about, not just less vibrato, but the nuance. Mm-hmm. He uses the word nuance thousands of times in that book. Absolutely. I think he's on about something.
Yes, a nuance which comes in another way. It comes through the bow and speeds and pressures and points of contact. And those basic things which we try to master. Yeah. And an understanding of the musical language and manifesting itself in a slightly different way to how so many performances that you hear with that piece, which are steamrolled through at 90 miles an hour fortissimo.
Yeah, and again, it's that thing of, I love what you're saying about the kind of the layers of accretions of these great warhorse pieces that we have to learn as string players, but being able to look at them and shift that paradigm and say, well, why does it have to go like that?
Yes, absolutely, and it's a really interesting and difficult task as a student to work that out and get that balance right. You'd have come across Ephraim Neiman at Wells when he was visiting there quite regularly, and he would always recommend you never listen to a recording of a piece you're studying. Yes. Everything you can by the same composer, but never listen to the actual recording. You've got to create it in your head. Yeah. But that's not an easy skill, and it is definitely far easier to turn on YouTube and take that shortcut. And sometimes, practically, but professionally, of course, that's necessary. You know, there's many a time, like for the sonata I didn't know today. Of course, I listened to it on YouTube. Yeah. I didn't have time to study the piano part.
And audiate.
Audiate. I like that word. Yeah. I'm going to use that. Yeah. Of course I didn't. But so the shortcuts are there. But if you haven't got the ability to audiate, then you're definitely missing something.
Having said that, I think there is a skill, which is learning to listen to different recordings a little bit objectively and take different things from them.
Yes, 100% agree. Once you do get to the point where you have your concept not refined totally, but it's there in some form, then by all means listen to recordings, but lots of them. Yes. And critically evaluate what someone's doing and why. There's an alternative view, isn't there, that you can learn most by completely copying someone else's performance.
Like jazz students do.
Exactly.
Writing down an improvisation.
Yes. I think it's Manny Hurwitz said he entirely learnt the Brahms concerto by copying every single thing Szigeti did. So, then from that point you move forwards. And of course we as teachers will force a degree of our conception onto students as well. Certainly when the shortcuts are needed. Right, this piece has got to be done by next week for whatever reason, and opportunities that have arisen. Well, here's my music. Here's how you play it.
Yeah.
So, but yes, and I when I illustrate, because I would expect people to come back and play with the same sounds and same bow distributions and all of that. Otherwise, I'm not helping
Yeah.
in a way. But no, it's a really difficult balance, because again, I would change the advice I would give from one student to the next on the same
Right.
piece, as according to my understanding of what it is the student is trying to achieve.
Right. And even who they are as people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You said a lovely thing in your class today, which was that you love it when your students argue back with you.
Yeah, I do. It's not a very efficient way of getting through a lesson, but it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, we've talked earlier today also about learning coming from different places at different times, and I learn most when my views are questioned.
Mm.
It's the scientific principle, isn't
Yeah.
it? That's so I'm wrong until you know, I assume that this is right until I can be proven wrong, sort
Yeah.
of thing. And yeah, I've changed an awful lot about how I feel about certain pieces, or all pieces, from working on them with students.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a challenge. So yeah, bring it on. Argue with me. Disagree with me. Get me to explain. You must. And if you disagree with me, then clearly I haven't explained myself properly, because
Yes.
I am right.
But it's what you're describing is a way of teaching which is a dialogue rather than a kind of guru.
Yes, absolutely.
And that agency, helping your students develop their own agency and autonomy as musicians.
Absolutely. The guru mentality, sometimes people call it, is I think quite dangerous.
Mm.
And I think psychologically it leaves students addicted to one particular teacher and one particular set of ideas.
Mm.
And you know, our role as educators is clearly to make ourselves redundant.
And actually, the other thing is once they leave higher education, they go into the profession.
Yeah.
They could say, well, now I don't need to be curious or learn anything because I've got my job. I can.
Yes.
In fact, the profession needs them to carry on being curious.
Absolutely. Which brings us very back
Exactly.
in full circle to where
Yeah.
we started. Those that just accept that what they know is what they need to know
Yeah.
aren't really that much use to the profession in terms of its development. They may have a role and be relatively successful within it, but they aren't actually developing the profession to increase its range of audience, or to create new art, because it comes from that curiosity. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We should eat our pasta. This is
We
actually
should.
very good.
It is very good. Yeah, it's getting a bit cold now.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Thanks, David.